Hello, I'm Marcus Anderson, and this is my speech entitled Histology, What It Is and Its Role in Medicine. So, ever wonder what happens to organs, tumors, and other body parts removed during surgery? Everybody knows someone that's had something removed during surgery, whether it's a child that's had their tonsils removed or a family member that's had an organ removed for cancer or a tumor removed for cancer or a skin lesion taken off. Everybody knows somebody that's had something removed during surgery. Do you ever wonder what happens to those things that's removed from the patient's body? Well, they go to a place in the lab called histology. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about the field. I've been in the field myself for going on 2 decades now, from everything from a bench tech, a histologist, up into the manager of an anatomic pathology lab. So I know a little bit about the field. Uh, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what goes on during the process within the histology lab and the role that histology plays in the field of medicine and healthcare in general. So to start out with, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of histology. The term histology wasn't coined until about 1819, but the field itself has been around in some form or another since the 1600s. Marcello Malfigi is known as the father of histology. He's known for looking at the capillaries of frogs through the skin using only a single magnifying lens. Uh, he was aided later on by the development of more complex microscopes that had multiple lenses, and he actually has some corpuscles and some structures within the skin of the human body named after him that he discovered. You can find out a lot more about the rich history of histology down through the years from an article entitled Once Upon a Microscope Slide, The Story of Histology in the Journal of Histology and Cytology by Hussein and Rod. It's a very good article. It's very informative. Point you towards that for some more about the history. But I want to talk a little bit about what happens once that tissue sample goes to the histology laboratory. Well, the first thing that happens is it gets grossly examined. It gets looked at. That tissue sample that's sent down to the lab, it gets looked at, and it gets dissected. If you've been in biology lab, you've dissected something and, looked at the different parts of the anatomy there. Well, that tissue sample gets dissected, and the parts of interest, maybe the parts that show the disease more accurately, is cut out of that and put into a tissue cassette and then put through a process. Now all these processes has been done manually in the past, but most of them are automated now. It's put on a machine, and what happens through chemical treatment during that process is the tissues, are all made up of proteins. So those proteins are cross-linked during this process, and it kind of freezes the tissue in time. And so when it kind of makes the tissue a little bit rigid too. Once it comes off that out of that process, we embed that tissue in a wax medium, and then a very thin section, thinner than a sheet of tissue paper, is taken off of that tissue once it's embedded in that wax medium, and it's mounted on a microscope slide and then put through a staining process. The staining process highlights the nuclear, aspects and the chromatic aspects of the different cells within that tissue. And it also it makes it more, the disease state more readily visible and studyable under the microscope for the doctor. In this case, the doctor that makes the diagnosis is the pathologist. So those the samples that are mounted on those tissue slides and stained are given to the pathologist to make an accurate diagnosis, and then that diagnosis is passed on to the clinician that's treating the patient, so they can actually drive a more effective treatment for the patient. Now, histology is not just that's the basic process that I described to you. There's also some subdisciplines within histology that are kind of interesting that can also aid and be a part of a total case once it comes into the histology lab. One of those being the field of histochemistry, where the tissue slide, the slide that's on that tissue, the tissue that's on the slide will actually be put through a different type of staining with different chemicals that will actually highlight different structures that you're looking for, a loss of a certain type of structure within the tissue, or maybe a microorganism within the tissue that might be causing a disease state that could be detected and more accurately drive the treatment of the patient by its detection. And another subdiscipline, a very interesting one, would be the field of immunohistochemistry, which will be another type of stain, usually done by an automated stainer, that the tissue sample on the slide would be treated with different antibodies for different protein sequences within the tissue. The tissue during that process on that stainer would be those protein cross-linked proteins would kind of be opened up a little bit through some pre-treatment chemicals with different pHs, and then it be treated with different antibodies that stain for those different protein sequences that might make it more apparent. Like if you had a tumor, say a tumor that showed up in a patient's liver that wasn't actually liver cancer, you could determine maybe it came from the lung or the colon. You could determine those things by treating it with these antibodies and actually find a primary tumor site and more accurately pinpoint what type of cancer was in that patient or what stage that cancer was in, and more accurately and more, can kind of pinpoint the type of treatment that the patient needs. Maybe a specific type of chemotherapy regimen or something like that would be more appropriate by whatever was found during the immunohistochemical studies that was put through that patient sample. So you can see that there's many different things that histology does to drive the type of care that the patient gets, the type of treatment that the patient gets. So from its humble beginnings to its modern incarnation, histology has plays a vital part of the patient's treatment within healthcare. So next time you see something go to you're removed from surgery, go to the lab, just know that there's a lot going on behind the scenes to bring what the patient gets, the information the patient gets back, and the treatment the patient gets from the clinician. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that drives that and comes to making those decisions that are being made for that patient on their behalf. And a lot of that has to do with what's done in the histology lab. Another couple of sources that I would point you to is the article, Immunohistochemistry of Cancers, within the Journal of Cancer Immunology by Ganadan and Janazad, very informative on immunohistochemistry, and also the Sloan Memorial Cancer Treatment Center website about the role of histology in medicine. I hope you all learned a little bit about histology. Thank you. Bye.